Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome to a fresh episode of Mind Body Medicine. We explore a doctor's perspective without a doctor's advice. I know it's been a while since I've been on here virtually and live, but now that I've moved to Charlotte, I am on site full time as the respite director, so my duties have continually kept me a little busy. So I needed to tweak the schedule just a little bit. So our show time is now 1 p.m. every other Thursday. Hopefully down the line in the not so distant future, I will be back to every single week, but stay tuned. I'm happy to be back with you guys. So those of you who are familiar with me already know that I very firmly believe that nature is the best medicine. Despite being a doctor, despite having been told to write all these prescriptions, all of the best medicine is available to us naturally. Whether it's the fruit and vegetables we nourish our bodies with, or the plant medicines that we use in essential oils or tonics, teas even, the fresh air and grounding that we get from our bare feet on the earth. Really everything that we need to heal ourselves already naturally exists. So it's pretty magical. So today I wanted to talk about what happens when we remove ourselves from these natural healing tools, when we don't get enough exposure. And so we'll talk about NDD, which is nature deficit disorder. And it's a relatively new concept to me. So I thought I would introduce it to you guys and see what your thoughts are surrounding that. Hello, David. Hi. Glad to see you tuning in. I'm not always great with the comments, but I happen to see yours pop up. So, all right. So, what happens when we remove ourselves from our natural healing world? We as a society have really experienced a cultural shift towards being indoors and connected to our computers, technology, rather than out in the world experiencing nature. And since the internet is still a relatively new phenomenon, most of us grew up with at least some connection to still playing outside. But this shift is especially evident nowadays in our children, right? Who have not known anything other than the internet and devices and screen time. I've literally seen toddlers that are more adept with an iPad than I am. But these advances in the technology world can really come at a cost, and we don't always realize. But there's a scientist named Richard Love who has coined a term to describe this phenomenon that happens when we orient ourselves around technology versus nature, and that is known as nature deficit disorder, or NDD. So this really describes the human costs that occur when we alienate ourselves from nature, whether on purpose or or just by nature of our new lives, right? The new normal. We have a diminished use of our senses. So we're not seeing, hearing, feeling, even tasting sometimes the way that we ordinarily would. If you think about when you eat a meal, if you're eating it across from somebody that you care about and you're having a conversation and you're taking your time, you're really going to taste that food a lot more than if you sit in front of the television and watch something on TV just by yourself as you kind of mindlessly eat the food. And I've tested this on myself, and there's a massive difference. I can eat the same exact meal, but depending on what I'm doing and what's in front of me, my taste itself can be blunted. This can also result in things like attention difficulties. There are also higher rates of physical and emotional illnesses that occur if we're isolating ourselves to the indoors. Some other things that they looked at with this is child and adult obesity, right? We're just naturally less active if we're not out and moving. You can have a vitamin D deficiency, right? Because we're not in the sun, so we're not getting that vitamin D activation that we normally would. There's also a rising rate of myopia, which is a fancy way for saying nearsightedness. So that's just an eye condition where close objects look really clear, but the far away ones are very blurry. And it makes sense, right? When we think about our devices, our computer screen, or even when we're texting up here, right? It's a very short line of focus. And a lot of us aren't really great about taking the breaks that we should when we're on technology, right? It should really be a good 5 minutes completely away from a screen every single hour. That's like a minimum, right? Ideally 10, 15 minutes. But just giving your eyes the chance to exercise, to use their muscles. We have 6 muscles in our eyeballs alone. And when you're staring at a screen, you're really not using them very much at all. So your eyes almost learn that they get to be lazy, right? So yeah, we just taking that time of being intentional, getting away from the screen, refocus, readjust, relax. It's also good for our concentration in general, right? That you have these little scheduled breaks. Also, a great time to get up and move your body a little if you want. I myself just got back from my lunchtime wellness walk, so I'm a little flushed, but that's okay. um, yeah, so while we're talking about nature deficit disorder, what is a medical diagnosis that we also see a lot of in children with a very similar name? Attention deficit disorder, right? Or ADHD. So today, children and adults who work and learn in this predominantly digital environment expend an enormous amount of energy, like blocking out our own senses just so that we can focus very narrowly on the screen that's in front of our eyes. So, in a busy workspace, Promise Resource Network is the perfect example, right? We're always hustling and bustling and helping people and just moving around. And so if you're trying to focus on something, you really have to just sort of put blinders on, if that makes sense. And this creates really an artificial focus point that makes concentrating on anything outside of technology really, really difficult. It's just practice, right? So we block everything out, we focus on this, but when it's time to apply that elsewhere, our senses get a little bit jostled and confused, and our bodies don't really know how to adapt because we've gotten so conditioned to a screen being our source of interaction. So this disconnection then is really something that can only be remedied by spending time in nature. And there are a lot of really cool studies about this, that time in nature can actually help a lot of children with things like building their self-esteem, that self-confidence. It can teach them things about self-soothing, how to calm themselves and cope with situations that are stressful. And of course, focus, right? So instead of an artificial focus, it's you're out in nature and you learn that instead of a screen, which is pretty stagnant, we'll say, right? It's not a lot is happening at once. But in nature, you might have an animal or a plant or the wind or the weather that's something new for you to just gently shift your focus and also experience. So interestingly, the quality of the nature experience, how good it is and feels, really depends on how direct the experience with nature is. And what do we mean by direct? So we're talking like, are kids getting their hands wet? Are they getting their feet muddy? Are they covered in dirt by the end of the day? The idea is that if they are, this is a more direct experience with nature, and this is a higher quality of experience. And the ability to get dirty and to be playful is so naturally inherent in children, and we've sort of reined it in and taken it away from them, whether it's for the pandemic or fears of their safety, things like that. So it can really help kids have confidence in themselves because you're giving them the power to make independent decisions with how they spend their playtime, right? Some kids love getting dirty, some are very averse to it, but even for those, you can still touch the water. You can still be barefoot in the grass, it doesn't have to be totally filthy. Just touch a little bit of the earth for a change. There's also that inherent kind of risk-taking mentality surrounding that, right? Do I want to get my new dress dirty? Whatever kids may think of. in their outdoor play. And this plays a really important role in their child's development. So what we found is if you don't have this independent play where they're making decisions on how to spend their time in nature and using their imagination, what happens is we begin to see a really sharp decline in this critical cognitive or thinking skill called executive function. So executive function is really defined as the ability to exert self-control, the ability to control and redirect your emotions and your behavior. And a large part of our executive function develops when we're very, very young through the act of make-believe play, which usually begins around the age of 4 years old. That's a developmental milestone, actually, that pediatricians look for, imaginary play. And a fun fact about this executive function or this self-control is a child's executive function actually is a better predictor of their academic success in school than the IQ level, right? So more and more, this is literal proof that you get more benefit from playing outside and using your imagination than any number of textbooks can teach you, right, on the IQ level. So that's pretty fascinating to me, right? That there is so much to be learned from play, from recess time that is viewed, with mixed opinions, but just to understand the impact that can really have from the time that you're born. So there are numerous studies that have shown the mental and the physical benefits of spending time in nature, and this doesn't just apply to children, it's for adults too. However, it really took until like the 2020 COVID pandemic, I think, for us adults to start realizing, okay, we have to stay at home now. We have these stay-at-home orders. Even the playgrounds weren't open at that time, right? So it took that forced isolation to reignite that desire to spend more time outdoors, to make it feel like it was a necessity, right? The pandemic really dramatically enhanced the public awareness of the need for deep human connection with nature. And it's also adding more of a sense of urgency to the movement to connect children, families, communities to nature in and of itself. So as young people are spending less of their time, less of their lives in general in natural surroundings, their senses narrow, like we talked about. And this is not only physiologically with the physical body, but psychologically, it takes a real mental toll. Kids become numb, and it can really contribute to a lot of behavioral changes, is what they're finding. So we now know that access to green space, which can mean anything from a backyard to a park to even like the nicely paved sidewalks where there are some plants and trees and landscaping, that's green space. So access to that is linked to a child's overall well-being, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, all of it. So adding greenery to schoolyards has actually been shown to increase pro-social behavior among kids. What they're finding is that they help each other. You can come. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Go ahead. Like I said, always in motion. Yeah, no worries. You're good. No, you're fine. So we're finding that these children are being helpful to each other. They're cooperating with one another. They're actually comforting each other and showing more empathy and beginning to share more cooperatively, right? So it engages this greater sense of self, like beyond the individual to a community and to caring about others. And so in the opposite way, there's a loss of access to this green space, and it has the opposite effect, right? Kids are being more antisocial. You'll see more bullying, more anxiety, more frustration. And interestingly enough, a 2013 study found that even looking at nature scenes can reduce your stress. It can regulate your heart rate, can lower your cortisol, that bad stress hormone we talk about. And if even looking at this image can do that, that just shows how powerful this influence really is. And there is a nature-based elementary school in a lower income region in, I believe it's Georgia. And so this is, they're having a lot of failures in the school system that they were noticing. And so they implemented this new program where it's nature-based learning. And actually, that specific school is showing more academic improvement than any other school in the region. And that includes schools that are given additional resources and additional funding for our traditional testing mechanisms and tutoring, right? So the sheer exposure to nature has been enough for them. And not only that, they found the children that attended the nature-based school were actually generally healthier as well. They had less asthma, they had lower incidence of obesity, and lower psychosocial disruptions, really. So without nature, you can get this NDD, this nature deficiency disorder, and leading to those short tempers, anxieties. I mean, even we as adults get cabin fever, right? The pandemic certainly showed that these effects are not limited to children. I think they're studying children more, though, because this is sort of the first generation that was born into the interweb of technology, right? I certainly didn't have an iPad when I was growing up. But for any of you parents out there, do you notice that your kids are like completely different humans if they have some time outside? I'd be curious. But my mom actually used to call it getting your yayas out, literally just expending your energy, being outside, being a little hooligan, and enjoying, directing your own play for a while outside, away from, the confines of your home, the rules of your parents, right? You can draw on the sidewalks all you want, can't really color on your walls. But sometimes my mom would literally drop my older brother off at the entrance of our neighborhood, which was probably a half mile or so, just to guarantee that he got some exercise and some time outdoors before coming home to his computer games. And miraculously enough, it would typically work. He would be very like antsy and I don't want to say aggressive, but just had a teenage attitude. These were his teenage years, and he loved computers. So he wasn't really happy until he had that. We actually thought it was sort of an addiction for a time. You can definitely be addicted to video games and computers. So yeah, sometimes parents understand that so profoundly that they'll resort to literally kicking the kid out of the car so we can walk half a mile back to the house in a safe neighborhood. Don't worry. And then there's a researcher at the University of Illinois in Chicago named Dr. Kuo, who has done research to show that access to these green spaces, which is what we're going to call them, can decrease aggression. It can decrease attention deficit disorder symptoms, and it boosts your immune system. So we'll talk about the mycobacterium in a minute, but yes, it even helps your physical health, which is just amazing to me. But Dr. Kuo was also quick to point out that there's a real unequal access to green spaces across socioeconomic and racial lines, right? So later on too, we'll delve into some ways that really anyone of any income level or housing situation really can consciously create these opportunities to connect with nature and to heal ourselves. So sometimes we have to get creative with it, but the good news, as we saw in that 2013 study, is even looking at a nature scene helps, right? So one of the greatest needs of young children is autonomy, and free play in nature is one way to satisfy that need. They want to develop that executive function, that self-control. So the beauty of nature is that if you're walking in the woods or a park, there is truly something for every age there, even up to adulthood. You've got rocks of different weights. You can talk about what minerals are in them, how much they weigh, how many you can carry, depending on how big and strong you get. They have tree stumps of different sizes. And if you look at a stump, you can count the rings, the concentric circles that are on that stump. And that's how many years old that tree is. Sometimes they're hundreds and hundreds of years old. There are lighter and heavier sticks. You can compare the wood content. You can see what species they're coming from, right? Try to identify a leaf and a bark pattern that might be consistent. So whatever a child's current skill level is, they can really work towards that next level challenge using something as simple as nature, which already exists. So I can completely understand how that nature-based school is having such a profound impact, because you're using tools that they can access at home and at school, right? They don't need to bring an iPad home with an app and a game. They can walk outside. And they're also at the same time learning about their own capabilities and challenging themselves, right? It's fun. It's a creative way to learn. So interestingly, also, the greater the biodiversity in like an urban park, the greater psychological benefits. So the more diversity we see, the better. And we'll talk about more ways to incorporate that later. But it's fascinating because we know now that not just on an intellectual level, but based on our own recent lived experiences through this pandemic, that not all activities are created equal when it comes to enhancing our children's mood and behavior. Prioritizing time in nature, exercise, even unstructured downtime can be viewed as prioritizing our child's mental health, their own well-being, and that's important now more than ever. So, solution-oriented. How do we fix this? How do we fill this huge gap that might occur because parents work all the time and the kids, are only safe in the house, where they don't have access to green space? Going back to Richard Louv, who's the journalist that coined this nature deficit disorder term, he created a list of ways that families can connect with the natural world, including some that don't require the green space, right? So his first idea is to pick a sit spot. This is a special place in nature, whether it's under a tree at the end of the yard, or a hidden bend of a creek nearby, or a rooftop garden. But picking a spot to sit for a few moments every day. Get to know it in the daytime. Get to know it in the nighttime. Go get to know it in the rain, in the snow, in the depth of winter, in the heat of summer. Think about all the things you can teach just based on that difference in experience about the weather and the animals and the climate, the sunshine that feels different to us. He suggests getting to know the birds that live there and the trees they live in, getting to know these things like they're your own relatives. So that it's going to reduce our sense of isolation and our species' loneliness, really. Another great way would be building a fort. Anyone ever built forts? I personally love them, even as an adult. I think they're great when I have an excuse to build one with a kid. But a fort or a tree house can help children with more problem solving, more creativity, and also learning how to plan things and learning how to create their own sense of security and their place in the world. So if you can't go outside today, what else can we do? Well, how about a world watching window? This is a way to bring the outside in and to also kind of get you out of this inner-facing world that a lot of us get stuck in the day-to-day. So if your family is lucky enough to live in a place that stars are visible, in Charlotte that can be hit or miss, but you can stargaze in the evening or the very early morning, look at the constellations, learn about our solar system. Children learn and absorb information 10 times better if they can have a natural connection to it, right? You can read it in a book about constellations, but when you see them for yourself in the sky, that intellectual curiosity, that hunger to learn and understand more is inevitable. It's going to happen. And instead of trying to jam information down their throats, they're going to be begging you to teach them more. So I thought that was a beautiful example. Some other ways we can bring the outside in indoor plants, as many as possible. We've got a giant, beautiful one behind me. There are several throughout this space. Um, you can definitely walk in the background. Anna already did it. Don't worry. But thank you. That's my team's dedication. She was ready to army crawl so that she didn't have to be on camera. But we're working with it. But yeah, so bringing those plants in, it also helps to like nurture something, see how things grow. One of the first things I do in the morning is I check on my plant babies. I want to see what has new leaves, what might be blooming. Of course, what needs water. That's a lot more common. But yeah, I always say, like, for millennials, pets are the new children and plants are the new pets. So join the bandwagon, see what all the fuss is about. I definitely enjoy my plant time. And they're also natural air purifiers, which is pretty awesome. Another way, of course, taking a walk or a hike. I mentioned I have now incorporated a 15-minute wellness walk into my day, right? A lot of us are given break time in our jobs. I think it tends to be labeled as like a smoke break, but if you're not a smoker, that doesn't mean that you're not entitled to that same 15 minutes away to go and do something that's good for you. So I like to walk no matter how hot it is. Another way is if you have dirt. I don't know if you've ever heard the saying, God made dirt, dirt don't hurt. That was what we said a lot, like if we drop something on the ground, or if, like, I skinned my knee, but it wasn't quite clean enough. It's fine, dust it off, maybe get some Bactine when we're back at the house, but we're not going to freak out about it. But what we mean by this is really like setting aside just a little piece of ground. It can be like 1 foot by 1 foot, but just a designated area that your children can dig into, literally. Research suggests that children strengthen their immune system by playing in the dirt. I mentioned this earlier. So it also weakens the immune system if you don't get in the dirt. So it really is true. And this is because soil contains something called mycobacterium. And this has anti-inflammatory and immunoregulatory properties. That means it boosts your immune system, helps those fighting T cells to kick disease out. So this is really a potentially useful countermeasure to prevent against negative outcomes to any stressors, really. So you can literally just purchase a small pile of dirt, which is less expensive than a video game and is going to last far longer, that your kid can play in, right? It doesn't have to be a big fancy sandbox. Literal dirt, soil. If you need it contained, based on your, not having a yard or whatever, get a little dirt in a pot. Maybe eventually they'll plant in it, but let them dig, let them get their fingers dirty and explore. And you'd be amazed at the results. Another suggestion is just finding nature everywhere. So we talked about that study showing that even viewing images of nature brings that sense of calm. It's obviously not going to be as great as if you're immersing yourself in nature completely, but it's a good close second. And we're all about tiny little changes that add up, right? So think about like National Geographic. They have an online guide called Finding Urban Nature. Pretty cool. Then there's the National Wildlife Federation that has a guide for building your own little backyard habitat. We recently moved and we're on a wooded lot. And our initial, plan was, well, we have to have a fence because we have a dog and, she likes to be outside most of the day. And we started to realize there is a whole ecosystem behind our house. We have massive amounts of cardinals, which I love. It's one of my favorite types of birds to see. And there's just dozens of them, male and female, all over the place. And deer too. We have whole families of deer, like literally a mom with 3 babies comes through a lot. We've got another buck with big horns that comes through, and they come right up to our windows, right? And it's just the coolest thing. And I can't imagine removing some of those trees just so that we can build a fence, at least not right now, right? So it's been really cool. But look up National Geographic, look up National Wildlife Federation. You can expose your kids to shows like Animal Planet or the Discovery Channel. That's actually all I was allowed to watch as a kid. It had to be one of those nature-oriented shows. I didn't really realize the why at the time. I thought like, oh, it's stupid educational stuff. But there's also an element of that connection with nature, which we've been really removed from for a long time. We used to be hunters and gatherers that lived as one with the animals, you know? So think about how separated we are these days when we barely even see a bird. So another one would be like ant farms. If you ever have had an ant farm, or if you've seen those like little sea monkey kits, this is like from the 90s now. I don't even know if they make those anymore, but those are really cool ways to observe how nature interacts. Or even planting like a mini herb garden or a tree outside that you can nurture daily. Just all kinds of different ideas that you can really take to reconnect yourself. So yeah, just keeping in mind, children are moving all the time. They're little bundles of beautiful chaos, right? But they also show this ability to show a sustained fascination, a real connection, a real focus, and even a tiny, tiny bit of that green space or that green time can be a place for them to slow down, watch an insect, move some dirt around, pick some flowers and identify what those are, just learning a little bit at a time. So now that we know better, we can do better. Starting with these small incremental changes that really add up and they enhance your well-being, your child's, your family as a whole, your relationship to each other and the ecosystem. It's really powerful. So yeah, I just wanted to dive into these different ways because yeah, I only learned about this fairly recently, nature deficit disorder, and my mind was blown. So I thought that would be a great first topic back to kind of chat about with you guys. And I will do my usual plugs to give you guys our connection information. If you have any questions about Promise Resource Network, who we are, the beautiful work that we do, feel free to call Kim at our front desk. That number is 704-390-7693. We also have an amazing warm line, which is something that you can call 24/7. There's always a listening ear there to support you. If you're experiencing any kind of distress or crisis, please give us a call. We have amazing people there that just want to listen and form a bond and connection with you. And last but not least is the program that I work with, known as the Respite. This is also called the Retreat at the Plaza. And this is a place that you can come if you're experiencing severe mental health distress, if you're in a crisis, if you just need a safe place to go that is not a hospital. We are very much about honoring your voice and choice and just providing a home-like supportive environment where you get to shape what your healing looks like. So if you have questions, as always, shoot me a message, write a comment. I do check back on them. And thanks for tuning in. I've missed you guys, and I will see you 2 Thursdays from now. Take care. Be well.